Good morning, everyone. Let's begin. We are learning Parshas Vayera, which begins Genesis chapter 18, and that's page 63. But we're going to skip a little bit in to page 65. Chapter 18, verse 20. Vayomer Hashem, and God said, Za'akas Sodom va'amora ki raba, v'chatasam ki chavda me'od. Verily, the cry of Sodom and Amorah is great, and verily, their sin is exceedingly grievous. And God has decided that because the people of Sodom and Amorah are so sinful, that the cities should be destroyed. Later on, we find that actually there are 4 cities which have been destroyed: Sodom, Amorah, Admah, Utzvoyim. And when we look at, so let's take just a general step back, and this is not the first time that the Torah tells of a story of a civilization being destroyed because of their sinfulness. As a matter of fact, it's the 3rd time that the Torah tells this story. The first time is the flood. The second time is the Tower of Babel. And this 3rd time, the destruction of Sodom. So let's examine what it is that that the Torah is teaching us about this destruction. And first, let's consider the difference between the destruction of the flood and the destruction of the Tower of Babel. So there's a fundamental difference between this, and it's widely known. The destruction that took place in the flood was complete and total. The civilization was completely wiped out. Whereas the civilization in the case of the Tower of Babel isn't wiped out, it's just reorganized. And the rabbis say that the reason for this is because the civilization in the case of the Tower of Babel, of the flood, involved violence and corruption. Violence and interpersonal what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of something unhealthy on an interpersonal level. Whereas the civilization in the context of the Tower of Babel were healthy interpersonally, but ideologically, they were corrupt, and that was their unhealthy point, was their ideological state. The people of the Tower of Babel were in a war with God. The people in the generation before the flood were in conflict with each other. And so the rabbis say that this teaches us how important is peace, and that there's and that we see such that we see that a society that conducted itself peacefully on an interpersonal level was given some respite. And so that's the sort of the general framework. Now, if we reflect on the destruction of the Sodom and environs, see something interesting. First of all, let's look at the moment that the city of Sodom is destroyed. This is chapter 19, verse 24. That's page 68. V'Hashem himtir al Sodom v'al Amorah gofris va'esh me'es Hashem min hashamayim. And God caused to rain upon Sodom and upon Amorah fire and brimstone from God out of heaven. V'yafoches ha'arim ha'el, and he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. So first, the Torah indicates two specific cities, Sodom and Amorah. And then the Torah goes on to speak of a more general sense, so these unnamed cities. So this, the rabbis tell us, these two cities refer to Admah and Tzevoyim, which makes 4 cities. Now, if we remember, in Parshas Lech Lecha, Avraham went to war in order to save. This is the second time that Lot is being saved by Avraham. Lot, Avraham's nephew, is caught in the crossfire, perhaps, in a battle between 5 kings and 4 kings. And the 5 kings, Lot is on the side of the 5 kings, and he is captured. And Abraham goes to war on behalf of the 5 kings, and he rescues Lot. Who are the 5 kings? Let's look at Parshas Lech Lecha. Chapter 14. Verse 2, page 50. There was a war with Bera, the king of Sodom, and Birsha, the king of Amorah, Shinav, the king of Admah, Shem-Aver, king of Tzevoyim, and the king of Bela, Tzoar. And King Bela, the king of Bela, who is Tzoar, and we don't know the king of Tzoar's name. So there are 5 cities in this region: Sodom, Amorah, Admah, Tzevoyim, and Tzoar. Now, if we go to now we go back to page 68, verse 19:21, chapter 19, verse 21. After the destruction of the cities, Sodom and Amorah, and the cities on the plain, Lot and his family are running away. And the angel tells Lot, run, fast run, because you need to escape lest the evil overtake you. Verse 20. Behold now, this city is near to flee to, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape there. Is it not a little one, and my soul shall live? And the angel said, Behold, I have accepted you concerning this thing. I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Go there quickly and escape there, because I cannot do anything until you come there. And therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot came unto Zoar. And then God caused to rain upon Sodom and Amorah fire and brimstone from God out of the heaven. So we have 5 cities. We know that Zoar is not destroyed. And so the 4 cities that are destroyed are Sodom, Amorah, Admah, and Zeboim. But the Torah names the cities of Sodom and Amorah as being rained fire and brimstone, whereas the other 2 cities remain unnamed. Admah and Zeboim remain unnamed, and they are simply overturned. What is the distinction between these cities? And what can we learn from it? So I want to say that, first of all, I believe that this teaching has a powerful message in our modern times as it pertains to identity politics. Let's look at the names of these 5 kings. And the rabbis focus on the names and say that there's teaching in these names. Page 50, chapter 14, verse 2. The name of the king of Sodom is Bera. The name of the king of Amorah is Birsha. The name of the king of Admah is Shinav. And the name of the king of Zeboim is Shemever. And Zoar's king's name is not known. So, what is the meaning of Bera? The rabbis say Bera means that he was doubly wicked. Ra is evil, Bet is twice. So he was twice evil. And the rabbis say this is because he was evil to people and evil to God. Birsha, there we have the word Russia, right? Birsha contains the word Russia, which is wicked. What is the meaning of Birsha? He excelled, he exceeded in his wickedness, which means he made great achievements in his wickedness. And this, we can understand, means that he achieved that means he finished one level of wickedness, and he finished the next level of his wickedness. An achiever is somebody who finished a level and has moved on to the next level. So this also indicates that he had a double level of wickedness. He was wicked to people and he was wicked to God. And now we go to the king of Admah, whose name is Shinav. Shinav, the rabbis say, is a composite of 2 words. Sina means hatred, and Av means father. He hated his father in heaven. Shem Aver is a wing. So he put on some Aver, he put on wings to fly up with haughtiness and pride, denying the existence of God, or countering the sovereignty of God. So we're getting a picture here that the kings of Sodom and Amorah were wicked to God and their fellow man, but the kings of Admah and Zeboim were wicked only to God. And now we can understand the distinction that's made between the destruction of these 2 categories of destruction, which relates back to the categories of destruction of the flood and the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel was a battle against God. And this, God said, does not need to be completely eradicated. It simply needs to be reorganized. Whereas the battle of human against human, when that reaches a critical mass, then that needs to be completely eradicated. Now, the truth is that this Parsha also contains a very deep secret about the coming of Mashiach. Because Lot is actually the ancestor of Mashiach. Lot is the great-grandfather of King David, and therefore he's the great-grandfather of Mashiach, of the Messianic king. And it is in this week's Parsha that he is conceived, in an act of illicit intimacy. Lot is running away from the destruction of Sodom, and Lot's daughters believe that there's no hope left for life at all, and they cause their father to become inebriated, and they seek to be impregnated by him. And and as a result of that, the daughters of Lot, one of them gives birth to somebody named Moab. And Moab is the great-grandfather of Ruth. And Ruth marries Boaz, and their child becomes the great-grandfather of King David, who is the great-grandfather of Mashiach. So the marriage of Ruth and Boaz is the reuniting of the descendant of Lot with the descendant of Abraham, who become separated. And Mashiach is the reconciliation of this Sodom culture. Lot goes to Sodom, collects sparks in their culture, becomes corrupted, and then ultimately King David and Mashiach, the Messianic age, represents the reconciliation between Abraham and Sodom, or the purification, the redemption of the holiness which is hidden in Sodom. There is a fascinating midrash. In Tehillim, Psalm 89, it says, I have found David my servant, and I have anointed him with my holy oil. And the midrash says on this verse, where have I found my servant David? I found him in Sodom. What is there to find in Sodom? So the Kabbalah explains that Sodom contains great spiritual power. And it is the underlying energy in creation that's hidden in Sodom. What does this mean? So let's take a step back and remember, Sodom is about the battle between human being and human being. It's when humans are pitted against each other without cooperation. And they each seek to actualize themselves to the detriment of the other. It is a zero-sum game. The only way to win is to destroy the other. So this is obviously unhealthy. But where is the hidden spark? Where is the holiness concealed in this thinking. And I think that a good illustration of that is modern identity politics, where the zero-sum game of identity politics, the identity politics is essentially where people are pitting one identity group against another and saying that my existence is threatened by the presence of your existence, and we kind of like in the kind of victim-oriented identity politics, we're saying that my identity needs to be included and uplifted and celebrated. So where that becomes a problem, obviously, is where you have two conflicting identities that each need to be uplifted, held up, and celebrated. And you can't always celebrate two identity groups at the same time. So this is where identity politics becomes destructive and problematic. But underneath it is actually something beautiful. And it's actually America is particularly vulnerable to identity politics, because written in our Declaration of Independence is that all men are created equal. The idea that every identity, so of course, there's a kind of equality of men created by God, of people created by God. And here we're going one step further, and we're saying that there are lived experiences that are shared by communities that represent something that is of value and celebrated, that should be celebrated. Just this, for example, this debate around how many genders there are, as an example of this, where even to a biological level today, there are biological scientists who want to argue that there are more than two genders, because of course chromosomal realities have variations. So where we used to have, of course, there were people who were, who had anomalies in their sex. We used to kind of group them loosely under two genders, and now we say no, every single gender needs its own name, it needs its own identity. And the same is also true now for in the cultural space. It used to be that when you filled out the sentence, they wanted to know if you were Black or Caucasian, and then they wanted to know if you're Black, Caucasian, or Hispanic. And then they want to know if you're Black, Caucasian, Hispanic, or Pacific Islander. And then they want to know if you're Black, Caucasian, Hispanic, or Middle Eastern. We're spreading into a kind of more and more differentiated and separate identities, more granular and more specific, because every person, it's essentially an extension of the liberal idea that there is sanctity in every person. And what is the underlying spiritual idea behind this? Saying that there's sanctity, that there's value or importance, even holiness in small groups of people and individuals. It is that it's another way of saying every individual has a spark of God inside of them, and the uniqueness of every individual is created by God, and that extends to the lived experience of each group. And it doesn't matter if you're in the majority or the minority. The minority now becomes important and of value. So this is something which is dangerous, because when it's a zero-sum game, because ultimately, if I am holding up my personhood as sacred, there's a danger in holding up my personhood as sacred, because of course that lends itself to a mortal battle to the death. If I can see the sanctity of my own personality and of my own personhood, and I can't see the sanctity of the personhood of another. Now, it's true that in the olden times of, let's say, when the world was ruled by the majority, it wasn't that the majority was denying the sanctity of the personhood of the persecuted minority in most cases. It's simply that the guiding principle of society was utility and not sanctity. And so for utilitarian purposes, it makes more sense to serve the majority, because that's where the action is going to happen. And that's where you can do the most good. By doing good for the majority, you do the most good for society, and you hope that the minorities will benefit through the trickle-down effect, that they'll be sort of, rising tide lifts all ships. That's a utilitarian argument that relates to the Tower of Babel, kind of the cooperative spirit. The cooperative spirit of Babel actually denies the individuality of each person. In order to cooperate, you have to compromise. In order to compromise, you have to deny certain truths about yourself. Majority rule requires the compliance and cooperation of the minority. And it essentially erases the minority's identity. Now, so in teaching us first about the destruction of the flood, where we have a zero-sum game of society, where people are killing each other because I need to survive, and even if that means killing you and taking away your property, then we go to extreme cooperation with the Tower of Babel, in which the society as a whole becomes the God. And in so doing, see, this is a battle against God in a way, because when you erase the minority, you are saying that there is no inherent essential value in the individual or in the unrepresented minority. If there is a strong religious argument to be made for identity politics, which says every identity, every individual was created for a purpose and for a value, and therefore needs to be held up. And it doesn't matter if utilitarian purposes, if the majority rule doesn't work, we have to demolish the structure and the systems that are based on this utilitarian approach, and we have to create new structures that find ways of including and celebrating every individual, every minority. Now, again, it isn't. I think we can all understand that isn't. It isn't an easy, practical idea, but the spiritual underpinnings of that are very powerful. So this is the balance between Sodom and Amorah and Admah and Tzorah. Sodom and Amorah are bad. They're battling against God, and they're battling against people, primarily because they don't have the spiritual awareness. So if we bring spiritual awareness into identity politics, then we have the ability to cooperate with each other.
Excuse me, what do you mean by identity politics?
What is identity politics?
I've never even heard the phrase. You can tell me later. I don't want to hold things up.
I suppose people need to know.
Thanks.
Let's.
Jane, you ever heard that phrase? Thanks.
What is identity politics? Identity politics is a political approach wherein people of a particular gender, religion, race, social background, class, or other identifying factors develop political agendas that are based upon theoretical interacting systems of oppression that may affect their lives and come from their various identities. So,
regardless of who you are,
well,
you have a common goal.
Well, everyone, no, that's not identity politics. Identity politics says that everyone is someone. Everyone has an identifying characteristic that shapes who they are and shapes that represents their identity, and that we should look at how my identity suffers as a result of its place in the systems and structures of wider society. So the battle for racial equality is an example of identity politics as it's being done today, right? It used to be that that we looked for equality between the races, where we wanted a colorblind society. That's not identity politics. Affirmative action is identity politics, where we seek to identify the level, the lived experience of a particular identity group and address their unique experience and try to treat them. So practically speaking, it often is associated with a hierarchy of victimhood, which group has suffered more as a minority, but it also on a positive level might say that each specific culture has its own contribution and its own special, unique. We're not seeking a colorblind society. We're looking to raise up and celebrate the individuality of each culture. You wouldn't find, for example, in the identity politics world, it wouldn't be okay to speak of cultures as barbaric or as primitive, because every culture has its own unique, special. So that's okay. Now,
great explanation. Thank you much.
So now we talk about Sodom and Amorah. So in identity politics, when you have God in the picture, there is the one creator who created all of us, and who, despite our perhaps our uniqueness, which results sometimes in conflict and difference, we can all agree that we are the uniqueness is of God. Whereas when you have a battle against God and against fellow man, inevitably it goes down to the individual, in which one individual will find themselves in a zero-sum game with another individual and will be in conflict with them. As we discussed last week, part of the sinfulness of Sodom was their refusal to tolerate hospitality. So it's each man for themselves, and each person has to fight for themselves, and every person has a sacred duty to protect themselves and their own family, which of course is an extension. It could be seen as an individual identity as well, right? So the secret that the Torah tells us now is that Mashiach is hiding in Sodom. And what Mashiach actually, an example of a Mashiach idea that relates to identity politics is Techiyas HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. So an old way of thinking of Mashiach is that we want to create a better world. right? So generation after generation is working on this job to make the world a better place. And ultimately, we arrive at that destination in which there is a better world. But what happened to all those people who died along the way and who will never get to see the promised land? So the old way of thinking, the utilitarian, majority-oriented way of thinking says that doesn't matter. They gave their lives for the cause, and the cause is what matters. And the fact that on the whole, the world is repaired and improved means that that the goal is achieved, and the fact that the individuals and the peoples whose lives were sacrificed or who died on the journey toward the promised land don't make it there don't matter. But that isn't the true fulfillment of the Messianic vision. The Messianic vision says, no, every person matters, and thus we have resurrection of the dead. Nobody's going to be left out. All those people need to be celebrated and uplifted and brought into the Messianic vision. No individual can be left out of the Messianic vision. So that's the kind of idea there. And so that's why we might say that King David is hiding in the city of Sodom. And he needs to be found there, needs to be discovered there. So we have a toxic Sodom, and we have a elevated, redeemed, and healthy Sodom, a reconciled Sodom. And the secret to the reconciled Sodom is Adma and Savoyim, in which it's true that we see the kind of the grades, right? The cities of Adma and Savoyim were against God, but they weren't against each other because they already had so this is the balance that we're trying to find, where on the one hand, we can hold up individuals and celebrate unique lived experiences, and at the same time allow that to be cooperative and interactive and intersectional. So I know we talk a lot about today in the identity politics world, there's a lot of talk about intersectional politics, where Black people need to show up for Asian people, and workers of, it's kind of, along the lines of workers of the world unite, right? It's kind of the socialist notion, but whereas in the socialist world, again, it was colorblind. Today, it is each suffering class should be able to look to their own suffering to identify the suffering of another. Okay, so the truth is that today, Jews tend to be left out of the intersectional politics because look, anti-Semites find a way to cut Jews out of every progressive movement, even though Jews are the ones who started and the Jews get cut out of it. But in the end, look, we'll know that Mashiach was found in the intersectional, Mashiach will be found in Sodom when Jews are uplifted and celebrated in the intersectional world. Until Jews are celebrated in the intersectional world, Mashiach hasn't been found in Sodom. So, but we as Jews have a responsibility and an obligation to move that forward. And that means celebrating ourselves and recognizing that I am a creation of God, and I am worthy and valuable simply for that. And then being able to look at my fellow human being and seeing how they too are a creation of God, and they are worthy and valuable just for that. And perhaps Mashiach starts in Sodom, in each individual being able to find within their own identity and in their own individuality, to be able to find the spark of God. That's a kind of Mashiach hidden in Sodom. What might be entitlement and haughtiness is instead insight into the finger of God, the uniqueness of each individual. is a sign, is an example of the presence of God. And so we don't want to leave anyone out, and we don't want to eradicate the, we don't want to, while one iteration, one chapter of the Sodom story needed to be destroyed, but that doesn't mean that Sodom is lost forever. Lot and his daughters, remember their mother was a Sodomite, right? It seems, that's my assumption. She certainly bought in. She didn't make it out, right? So the daughters of Lot is a cousin of Abraham, but the daughters of Lot are half Sodomites, but their children are still half Sodomites because their father is still the nephew of the father of their children is also their father, who is the still half a nephew of Abraham. So in the children of Sodom, in the children of Lot, we have this synthesis of the world of Abraham and the world of Sodom. Abraham, the lover of all, and Sodom, the celebrator of each. Abraham, the lover of all, Sodom, the celebrator of each. So that's in the language of Kabbalah, that's the reconciliation of Tohu and Tikkun, which means chaos and order. So chaos, Tohu is chaos, Tikkun is order. So we need to reconcile Tohu and Tikkun. We have to have both. Chaos and order have to find a balance between them. Imagine that, finding a balance between chaos and order. Order is generally trying to balance the chaos, right? But sometimes order becomes an end in itself. So order has to contend with chaos. What is chaos? Chaos is everybody doing their own thing. So that's identities. That's every identity for itself. And order is the erasure of individual identities in order to accomplish a common goal. So that's cooperation without individuality. And so what we need is the reconciliation of Tohu and Tikkun, the balance between chaos, and we want to hold on to a little bit of the chaos because it's beautiful, because that's where we have uniqueness and individuality. But at the same time, chaos is self-destructive. So may we speedily in our days merit to see the coming of Mashiach. But I think that we are seeing it
Amen.
today, where we're working along these lines. It's messy, but we're headed in the right direction.
Tikkun can also mean repair, correct? As in Tikkun Olam?
Yes. So what is repair, right?
Order, exactly.
Well, so the tikkun, there's two kinds of tikkun. There is tikkun, which is restoring order. That's repair.
Okay.
But there is existential tikkun or essential tikkun, which is simply order, right? When you take something that is chaotic and you impose tikkun on it, so then you're repairing the chaos. But the capacity to repair as an entity for itself is order, not repair. Okay. That was kind of meta, that last line. Right? The capacity to repair is an identity for itself.
Do you write these down?
No, I record it.
There you go.
It's going to be on YouTube. So at least it'll be there somewhere. Okay, guys, thanks for joining. A good Tevach. See you next week.
Thank you, boss.